You're listening to a 58 Ember production.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. I'm your host, Haley Rawl, and I am joined today by Rosie Card.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. Highly requested Rosie Card. I'm going to intro you.
Cool.
You let me know if I miss anything.
Okay.
I feel like you're a bit difficult to intro because you're a Renaissance woman. Like, you do many things, which is really cool. That's a compliment. But Rosie is an entrepreneur, a content creator, a political commentator, and activist. She was very big, a very prominent figure in the progressive Mormon space. But just earlier this month, she wrote an op-ed in the Salt Lake Tribune highlighting women's issues in the Mormon church and also kind of officially announcing that you no longer identify as a member of the Mormon church.
Yeah.
Very big moment for you.
Wild.
I can't wait to talk all about that. Did I miss anything in the intro?
No.
Okay,
honestly,
good.
When people are like, will you send me a bio? I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I just like to loudmouth on the internet and
we love girls who like to loudmouth on the internet. I feel the exact same way. Before we dive into talking about leaving the church and kind of where you're at now and where you hope to go, let's just get a little background for anyone who doesn't know. If you could just give us in a nutshell, what was your upbringing like, specifically as it relates to Mormonism?
I feel like I grew up in a pretty standard LDS home as far as like scripture study, FHE, conservative parents, but unique in the sense that my mom always worked. And so we had this kind of different perspective. And yeah, it just felt like pretty basic, but like very devout. My parents were big on like going to the temple every week, our scripture study. And for me, I was definitely like, I felt so in, I can't even begin to describe for you.
As you can be.
As in as you can be. And, you know, I left home early. I left at 16, and I felt like being devout is what would keep me safe. And so I feel like at 16 is when I really became like borderline zealot committed.
Because you were in Utah.
I was in Utah.
Which part of Utah?
So we were in like the general Salt Lake Sandy area until I was 8. We moved to New York. And then in 2001, we came back to Utah. And then when I was 16, I moved back to New York. So it was kind of like bouncing between those two.
And what brought you to New York was modeling. Is that right?
The first time we went for my family was for my mom's education. She wanted to get a degree in interior design, so we moved to New York so she could go to FIT in Manhattan. And then I went back by myself for modeling.
At 16?
At 16.
Yeah, that's so interesting to think about how going to New York at 16 could maybe go one of two ways as far as like the Mormonism of it all. But what do you think contributed to like the doubling down or becoming even more devout, like you said?
I was terrified that Satan would get me. To be frank, like I was potentially in some pretty sketchy situations, and there was a lot of opportunity for potential harm just being a child in a very adult environment. And so I am grateful for my fear, because I feel like I avoided a lot of potential bad situations. Did I also potentially avoid some great things? Sure. Yeah, like I was, you know those little manuals that were like teachings of the prophets? Do you know what those are?
Yeah.
It would be like adult Sunday school.
Yes.
I would like read one of those a week.
Very intense.
Very intense, because I just thought like this is the only way to stay safe. I wasn't able to go to church regularly because of the job I was doing. And I just like avoided all party club invites, which now sometimes I really regret.
Yeah, you're like, that could have been fun.
Yeah, my roommates went to Vin Diesel's birthday party with Mary-Kate Ashley, and I'm like,
with Mary Kate and Ashley.
Yes,
and you just like wouldn't.
Oh, I was like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, that is fascinating to think about. Not only New York, which is very, like, for a Utah Mormon brain, very worldly, but also modeling is like maybe one of the top industries I can think of that would be perceived as dangerous, worldly.
Yeah.
Was it an issue with your family or the community for you to go to New York and model? Was that like an inner struggle for you either, or not really?
For my family, no. Well, I should say my parents, like the last thing, they have 5 daughters, and the last thing on earth that they wanted would be for one of their daughters to make money off of their looks or their body. My mom like never taught us to do hair and makeup. They just like never wanted us to think that our appearance is what was valuable about us. And so that was definitely a stretch, but they felt like it was in God's plan for me. So they didn't feel like they could say like, they weren't going to be like, no. And because we lived in New York, they're very comfortable with it. But like, I mean, I was living with my agent and his boyfriend. And so I just remember my mom saying like, maybe in the ward, don't mention that you're living with a gay couple. Like, like maybe we don't need to. And she definitely, my mom, mostly, of course, dealt with some flack from people, some judgmental comments. I think a lot of people were also just like, how are you letting a 16-year-old move out to New York by herself, or like Singapore or Tokyo? And looking back now, I totally understand that. But there was always kind of like, or I should say sometimes more judgmental, like, how are you letting her participate in this industry vibe?
Yeah.
But then I also think a lot of them thought I was really cool. So
yes, it's kind of like I feel that way within the Utah Mormon pockets, where it's kind of like a fear, but also an admiration for those industries, or New York or LA. So that's really interesting to be participating in that. Do you remember when you first started experiencing cracks in your belief system? Because you were super, super devout. We're talking about 16 years old, modeling, still super devout. When did any doubt or questions enter the picture as far as your faith in Mormonism?
It's interesting because as I think about it, I don't feel like there's one particular moment. I mean, I guess if I'm looking back through the lens of like an active Mormon, I can see when I started down the slippery slope. Mm-hmm. And that would have been probably close to 10 years ago. There was a general conference where there was only one woman who spoke, and that really caught me off guard. So this would have been like in my mid-20s. And I started kind of like digging into it, and I realized like, oh, there's only really ever mostly 2 women that speak. And it never clicked in my brain. And I wrote a Facebook post. This is back when like people wrote Facebook posts that kind of went mini Utah Mormon viral, just being like, hey, I am so devout and I'm so in. And I think I may have been still working at the church at that point.
In the PR department, right? You worked
I worked in the publishing services department, which is kind of like the creative department. So I worked for a team that was assigned to follow the 12 apostles all over the world and record their like talks to stake presidency or stakes, kind of like we would say like the modern day Book of Acts, like recording the teachings of the brethren as they went around.
Got it. So you were following apostles around and helping.
I was supporting. So my boss would go around on the trips, and I like helped plan them, and then we would make like, maybe some of the viewers now know what my plan is. Did you do my plan on your mission?
I do remember my plan. Yes, I do remember my plan.
I helped produce my plan. I actually was just going through my email recently and produced all those videos and helped shoot them and edit them and was a part of that project.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So you were working for the church when you recognized the disparity in women speaking at General Conference and made that Facebook post.
And I just was like, hey, why? It was an email actually that I sent to President Nelson. I knew the organization of the email structure for church employees, and so I just guessed what his email was. And I sent it to like 3 emails. One bounced. One was a random employee that was like, yeah, I'm not him.
The prophet.
and he was just an apostle at that point, or in the first presidency.
Okay, yeah, because he wasn't the prophet yet.
But I had filmed some stuff for him before. And then one must have made it because he sent me a letter back. But it was essentially just like, you say, you get this famous talk of plea to my sisters saying, we need your voices, we need you to speak up. And it was like, we can't speak up unless you give us airtime. Mm-hmm. And like, as a woman, I value and need and understand that we are different, and I need to learn from my female leaders. Mm-hmm. And so that would probably be the first instance.
Got it. And did that kind of lead to, because ultimately you ended up being really vocal as a progressive Mormon. So as I'm categorizing progressive Mormon as someone who is saying, yes, I'm in the church and I very much believe this, but you were actively pointing out these discrepancies with women's issues, with racial issues. Was that kind of the beginning of that with that Facebook post going viral?
Yeah, that would be the beginning. And really, I felt like these are just discrepancies with like, I felt like the church, whether it's cultural or just kind of on like, what's the word I'm looking for? Not doctrinal, but I just felt like it wasn't aligning with doctrine. And so I felt like this is not what Jesus taught. It's not aligning with our doctrine. So why? And I never felt like I was out of line. And I know that a lot of people would say like, oh, well, you're kind of coming up with your own version. But I felt very, very dedicated to, because from the time I was 16, I was really digging deep. And
you knew your stuff.
I knew my stuff. Uh-huh. And I had the training as an MTC teacher and the exposure working at the church. Like, I felt really confident in my stuff, and it just didn't feel like it aligned.
That distinction is super fascinating because I think a lot of people feel that way in the early stages of faith crisising, or like recognizing issues with the church is not even like, oh, the church is wrong. It's okay if the church is what it says it is, which is helping us come closer to Jesus Christ and teaching us about Jesus Christ, then these things that the church is actively doing or supporting really don't make any sense. Yeah. And then you kind of see that divide getting bigger and bigger. I think a lot of people, our little milestones of leaving were like, okay, why are they doubling down on gay people not being able to get married? That doesn't seem to make sense according to the gospel, the doctrine that we were taught.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also funny to think about like the confidence that gave you. It's really beautiful actually, because you were like, no, like I know what I was taught. And it seems like for some reason the church headquarters or the prophet and apostles are like not in line with what I was taught, what I grew up learning and partaking in. I want to talk about the online progressive Mormon stage.
Yeah.
I have always said, as someone who now does post-Mormon stuff, that I think probably the worst place to be on the internet is as a progressive Mormon, because everybody's mad at you.
Don't do it.
Everybody's mad at you. The Mormons are mad at you. The ex-Mormons are mad at you.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. What was that like for a good amount of time? I mean, you tell me how many years, but you were, I feel like for a long time, really publicly talking about these really controversial topics in a way that I think probably upset people all across the board.
It was... when I first started doing it, I was doing it through the avenue of my temple dress company, Q.Noor. And people were really excited. And I think it was like a breath of fresh air, because 10 years ago, no one was doing it.
No one. Like all of these Instagram accounts of women talking about the church, like no one was doing this. And so people were excited to see a post that was like, hey, maybe we shouldn't judge each other based on our garment choices. Just like most generic kind of stuff. Yeah, but that was kind of radical to be publicly saying.
Like my engagement on like my posts back on those early Q.Noor days was just like insane, because no one was doing that. And I think a lot of people really were like, finally, like, we can have these conversations and these are important things to talk about. And as I kept going, it did start to like really, I mean, it got really, really bad.
Yeah.
There were obviously people on both sides, like you said, who were so angry with me. And the interesting thing is I totally get it. Do I excuse harassment, abuse, any of that? Absolutely not. And that was really, really difficult to deal with. But I get it. Like, I have been an active, devout LDS woman, seeing other LDS women speak and be like, you don't represent me. How dare you? Like, and I have been on the more progressive or out phase and look at women who are in and be like, come on. So like, I get it. I started doing it early Q.Noor, which was like 10 years ago, almost exactly. And I was like going hard at that for probably 5 or 6 years. And then it reached a point where it was, not only it felt like it was harming my business, which was my livelihood completely, but I like really was getting bad mental health wise.
Yeah.
And there was one instance where it was kind of the perfect storm. It was a weekend where I don't even remember what I posted, but it made both parties so angry. And it happened to align. And of course, the average person on the internet didn't know this was happening in my life, but my cousin died by suicide on that weekend. And so I had a major panic attack, was in a really, really bad place. And I just decided like, this has to stop. And so I slowly started to kind of like just stop talking about my personal faith online and just started to like pull back on what I was doing in general.
That sounds so difficult. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I want to take a beat really quickly just to talk about Q.Noor for those who don't know.
Yeah.
So that was a temple dress company, which was also very progressive because as far as I understood it, it was, okay, we go to the temple as women, let's offer dresses that are actually going to make us like, that are comfortable and more modern.
Yeah.
Then because when you go to the temple, for those who don't know, you have to wear a temple dress and there's just like not that much on offer.
Yeah,
Hardly
I mean,
anything.
they were all like uncomfortable, very starchy polyester and not attractive whatsoever. Not that I think going to the temple needs to be a fashion show, but also we don't need to feel ugly.
Yes, exactly.
And there's enough going on in there that would make you feel that way. So I was like,
we may as well be comfortable, right?
right. And I just thought, you know what? At the very least, I just remember going to try on my first temple dress and looking at my mom and being like, Mom, what is going on? And she was like, it just kind of is what it is.
Sorry.
And I was like, there's no way. And so I just thought like, well, maybe I could figure out how to do this. And my goal was to make comfortable, nice temple dresses so that women could put them on and just kind of like feel good about themselves.
Yes.
And not feel so silly.
Yes, I love that so much. And that makes sense that in that pursuit of promoting that business, you also had that progressive Mormon flair, because I think that's already kind of a progressive thing of like, well, let's let women be comfortable and like kind of celebrate, the being a woman and this like exciting whatever in a way that hadn't been done before. So it makes sense that then you're also talking about your own progressive faith.
Yeah.
When was it that what was the timeline of your cousin dying by suicide and you pulling back from talking so much and so openly about your faith? Was that a couple years ago? Less?
So that would have been around like 2019, 2020.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that long ago.
Yeah. And around the same time, so I had been attending the family ward that I lived in, and there was a couple in that ward who was like heavily involved in the Doesn't Twitter space.
Can you describe Doesn't Twitter really quick for anyone who doesn't?
It's not so much a thing anymore, but if you can just imagine like an extreme right faction of group of people mostly on Twitter, mostly from spam anonymous accounts, very, very sexist, racist, homophobic, and like, I'll die protecting the prophet. Like, what was the Rockwell? What was the
Oh yeah, Porter Rockwell.
Porter Rockwell? Like, they like.
And all their pictures are like Porter Rockwell.
Yeah, they, like,
but
dream of being Porter
their defense of the prophet is really just saying like sexist things to like progressive Mormon women.
Yeah.
Or yes.
So I didn't know that this couple was in my ward, but they got my phone number off of LDS Tools and would like send me harassing text messages and tweet stuff about me online that wasn't true, saying like we're in her ward. And it was really, really bad. And the ironic thing is the leadership of the ward and the stake knew who it was, but they wouldn't tell me because they wanted to protect them. So,
oh my gosh. So they were actively harassing you with your phone number that they got from the ward directory.
Yeah.
But then when you brought it to leadership, they were like, sorry, we can't tell you who this is.
So the bishop was like, I have a pretty good idea who it is. And then the couple started going directly to the stake president. So the stake president knew who it was, but they were protecting their privacy, I guess. But not the 29-year-old, 30-year-old single woman.
Yeah.
And so, they would text me things like, God doesn't need a vagina to like do his work, So just ridiculous stuff. So I stopped going to that ward as one might.
Yes.
And started going to the single adult ward, which you probably have never been to, but just they are a whole new world.
Yes. Very different vibe.
Yeah. And then 2020 pandemic hits. So that was a really nice opportunity for me to kind of like step away without a ward coming after me, because like no one in a mid-singles adult ward knows who anyone is.
COVID hits, you stop going to church at that point. You just came out as no longer identifying as a member of the church.
So like how did that happen?
Yes. Oh, and when did that happen?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've had a little bit of just because we've conversed like over DMs and stuff. So I feel like that happened well before you just talked about it this month.
Yeah.
So when did that happen?
I mean, one thing that I'm really grateful for is that even though it was a really like upsetting and sad and hurtful way that it started, I'm grateful for the opportunity to just take it 100% at my own pace. And it allowed me to, Kyle, my husband, and I would kind of say like, we're putting the church in timeout, because the church is essentially like the church is biting other people. It's hurting people. And we're going to say like, it's in timeout right now until it stops hurting people. For a long time, I thought like I could make that separation. And I really like sincerely felt like the church is hurting people. I'm going to separate myself from the church, but I still am 100% in on the doctrine. Mm-hmm. It was shocking to me how quickly that unraveled and how that just didn't make sense. And it honestly, just over the last 5 years has been like a slow, and of course, like with every new thing that the church does, it kind of solidifies. The muskets talk was huge for me. That's when I was like, I'm not paying tithing anymore. I'm going to donate 10% to other organizations. It just was this progressive thing that happened over the last 5 years. And then ultimately, I'm really, really grateful. I have a really wonderful therapist who has been like so supportive and so just really patient. And she has all the reason in the world to hate the church and tell me like, oh, you should get out of there. But like, not once did she ever pressure me. And so having someone who could listen to all of my heartache, hurt, and just continue to encourage me to take it at my own pace meant the world to me. I would say like ultimately when I decided I was like done, was, and this is, some people are going to laugh and roll their eyes at this, when I saw Barbie.
Love it. Obsessed.
I just was sitting there at the end monologue when the, like Ms. Mattel was like, life is hard and people make up things like patriarchy to help make sense of life. And for me, that was like, people make up things like religion or Mormonism in order to help make sense. And I felt what, the Mormon me would say, like the spirit, as I'm like crying, say like, you don't have to keep twisting yourself into knots in order to make yourself fit into the Mormon church. And you don't need to keep trying to twist the Mormon church into something that you want it to be. Like you can just let this go. And that was when I was like, okay, I think I'm okay with not only just saying like, I'm not going to church and it's this conflicted thing. I'm going to just be like, I'm okay with just being done with that. Mm-hmm. But it honestly wasn't until the most recent anti-trans update, if we call it an update, I don't know, like the bathroom thing. Mm-hmm. The bathroom thing is like, okay, I'm done.
And can you explain the bathroom thing really quick too?
It was if a trans individual is at church, they have to have like a buddy either go to the bathroom with them or like stand outside the bathroom while they go to the bathroom by themselves. Just like the most bizarre, ridiculous thing. I mean, there's just no reason for that other than making trans people feel unsafe, unloved, unwelcome. There's no argument that you can have that it's in support of anyone else. And I have trans and non-binary loved ones. And I was like, absolutely not.
Yeah. I love that it was the Barbie movie, and I love that story. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about faith kind of unraveling and how you like feel something and then the church does something that it's like they're showing who they are, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're like, okay, so they really are just kind of homophobic. But maybe there's still some good in this. Maybe there's still, the doctrine is still good. There's still this. And then there's another homophobic talk or a transphobic something. And I think that's what I feel sometimes when I'm witnessing progressive Mormon content. Where I'm at now is it feels like a lot of twisting, exactly like you said. It feels like the person is twisting and they're trying to twist the church. And that's a really difficult mental space, I think, to be in, because I did the same thing. Yeah. But I also really appreciate hearing your story, because I do think that progressive Mormons can get a really bad rap. And I've said certain things here and there about it myself, but ultimately to what your therapist said, and not even saying that every progressive Mormon ends up leaving or has to end up leaving, but I'm so glad that you had that space and that time to process, because it's a really big thing to unravel. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the internet is what the internet is, but as far as what I can do about it, that gives me a lot of perspective and compassion, because people are just trying to figure out how to make it work, how to make this thing that meant everything to them still make sense according to evolving values and beliefs in an evolving world. And I guess it just makes a lot of sense that takes a lot of time.
Yeah. And I mean, I would kind of say like, I felt like I was desperately trying to hold on to the edge of the boat. Like that I was hanging on the edge with my fingers gripped in trying, and it felt like the church was stepping on my fingers. And I know a lot of people, and I mean, the ironic thing is you fall off the edge of the boat and you realize like, oh, the water's this deep. It's fine. I'm safe. I'm okay. Mormonism is so intense. And it is, the way I've described it is like, and I'm really big into like crafting right now and sewing, so that makes sense for me. But I've described it like I've spent my whole life weaving this tapestry, and Mormonism is part of every single fiber. Like there is not a fiber in my life that Mormonism is not wrapped around. And as I've realized like patriarchy and homophobia and all this kind of stuff, I thought I could like tug on those pieces of yarn and I could pull them out of my tapestry, but the whole thing is unraveled. And so I'm standing here with just like this mess, and now I am excited that I have a lifetime of kind of like going through these knots and untying it, and I can, weave a new tapestry. But it is so complicated, and I understand how people on both sides want someone to either come in or out. because I think personally, it's really, we also want validation that we did the right thing. But we have to realize that like we have to own our own choices and our own path and accept that everyone else has their own choices and their own path, and it has nothing to do with ours.
That's so true, because ultimately I think that's probably what's at like the root of my trigger around progressive Mormonism, which is interesting you say that, because I feel like I'm not really triggered by that anymore. And I think when I was, I would always ask people like, how are they still making this work?
Yeah.
And that was probably because I still felt insecurity that I couldn't make it work.
Yeah.
And seeing people who seem to be more aligned with my values and my beliefs now on the outside still making Mormonism work was really upsetting to me, because I felt like, well, I couldn't do that. So how are they doing that?
Yeah.
And the more confident I've become in my own choices, the less it just matters to me in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think that's a perfect way to put it. And I love that analogy about the tapestry, because it's really representative of both the absolute devastation and the absolute joy
So exciting.
of having everything deconstructed and being like, what's next?
Yeah.
Before we jump into what's next, I have one more question about the deconstruction side of things, which is that you were so in on the doctrine. Like the thing that I think people would say, like the core of Mormonism is love, is, you know, Jesus's teachings about love your neighbor, love one another. When Mormonism unraveled, what was it like making sense of the doctrinal things that you were taught and that you had hung on to so tightly?
Yes. I think it was like little bits here and there. And one of the things which is so funny, I don't know why this is sticking out in my brain, but you did an episode on patriarchal blessings.
Yes.
And I remember seeing the comments. This kills me, and I can't believe I'm saying this. The comments on an Instagram post. And there's a part in my patriarchal blessing, which I always like, whenever I felt like I was like on my mission, trying to be like a progressive Mormon online and like do this important work. It was because there's a line in my patriarchal blessing that said like, I would be, man, I used to have it memorized and I don't, like a leader among the women of the church. And I felt like that was it. And then on the comments of this post, there were girls that had typed out the exact wording.
No way. Of what was in your patriarchal blessing.
And there were like multiple that was said, oh my gosh, this is the exact wording.
Like mine says that too. Mine says that too.
And I was like, what the fuck? No, this is, I was like, what?
That's earth shattering. Like people don't realize.
Earth-shattering.
No, that is truly earth shattering. Yeah.
That was like a pillar for me since the time I was like 16 years old. And to see it typed out on the internet and multiple women saying like, oh, that's in mine. I was like, are you freaking kidding me? I was told that this was the words of Jesus to me. And it's Brittany and Mackenzie's? Like what? So little things like that. And getting more comfortable with just reading historical things.
Yeah.
The book, I think it's called A House Full of Females. It's by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich. I think she's the only LDS person to get a Pulitzer Prize. She is just a historian and she is incredibly talented. And it was about polygamy and just reading what happened from a very like non-emotional place just helped me be like, oh man, I'm not buying this. And I think ultimately so much of Mormonism, like when you're on a mission, you teach people to pray. If the Book of Mormon is true, then everything else is true, right? So everything is kind of taken as this lump sum. And so unfortunately, the reverse, it works the same way. And when you realize like, wait, if this isn't real, then is any of this real?
Yep.
And it pretty quickly unravels
Yep.
from there.
I would bet if I we're making predictions for the next 10 years of the church, they are going to do their best to back away from that logic of, if the Book of Mormon's true, Joseph Smith's a prophet. If he's a prophet, this is all true.
Yeah.
They're going to try and find ways to dilute that messaging at the very least.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see how they'll try and adapt that. But I think it'll be very different messaging because it's very much working in reverse, where we've been taught, like, if the Book of Mormon isn't true, then nothing is true. So if you're able to poke some serious holes in the Book of Mormon, then like everything else kind of crumbles.
Yeah.
Let's talk about coming out via the op-ed in the Salt Lake Tribune. Very bold move. Such a phenomenal piece. I will link it for anyone who hasn't read it. Why did you decide to kind of announce your departure that particular way?
Yeah. So I felt like I had kind of been breadcrumbing and like casually dropping, because as much as like I love the work that I've done, and I maybe will one day look back and have some regrets, and there are some things I'm like, ugh, I wish I wouldn't have done that for sure. But it's pretty powerful to get DMs from people. Like, I have one that sticks out in my mind that, like, a teenager kid was like, I was able to have a first like healthy conversation with my grandma about the fact that I'm gay because I sent her this podcast that you did. And for so many people, because Mormons, if you're in, you're safe. If you're out, you're not. They were able to say, listen to this thing or read this thing from this temple dress company owner. I was so safe. People were able to use that as a bridge to connect with others. And so I would get these DMs from people, especially ones that would say like, I am so grateful for you. I feel like I'm able to stay in the church because I know you've figured it out how to do it. And I just, when I'm no longer active, I was like, oh, it's so uncomfortable. And I didn't know what to do about it. So honestly, for the past 2 years, I kind of like closed up my temple dress company when my son was born 2 years ago. And so for the past 2 years, I felt like I had been breadcrumbing it and like dropping things and saying things in stories. Like, I don't really go to church anymore. But I was still getting those DMs, and I was like, okay, people aren't getting it, which I understand because I wasn't being bold, but because I was terrified.
What were you terrified of exactly? I mean, I can imagine, but
I mean, and a lot of people, I see the comments about me. Like, I know that a lot of people have big issue with the way that I've made money off the church. And if I wasn't active in the church and continuing to do that, and I just always want to be like, trust me, no one's more uncomfortable with that than me. Like, trying to navigate that and figure that out, because ultimately I had to support my family and my life. And so I did need to find a way to kind of like, I had to navigate that first.
Yes, because you also had, your livelihood was tied up in your faith, essentially.
Yeah, which there is a small group of people like myself and church employees and anyone else who works essentially kind of like under the umbrella of the church, that's a really serious thing. Like, there are lots of church employees who are no longer believing or who are struggling, but they have to maintain a temple recommend to keep their job.
Yeah.
And anyone that says, well, you should just walk away, I just think bullshit.
Yeah.
You would never hold yourself to that same standard. Like, we have to allow time for people to figure out how to continue to support their lives.
Yes. I also want to make a point that you would likely face much more scrutiny for that than a man, because people might think, well, didn't you get married or whatever they might think, you know, but it's like, no, that's your livelihood. Yeah. That's your life's work.
Yeah.
And not only is it connected to your faith because of the temple dress company, but also because I'm sure you were making money doing content creation as well, which was also tied into that.
Totally.
So yeah, that's super complicated.
Yeah. So I needed to navigate that and make sure that I could still pay my mortgage. And so that took time. And I will say, like, closing down Q.Noor, like, it's not like I kind of built up some other thing. Like, it still was extremely and has been extremely difficult. I felt like I had been breadcrumbing, but I realized, like, okay, I need to do something more permanent.
Yeah, straightforward.
More straightforward,
Yeah.
more out there. And the Salt Lake Tribune reached out to me in August or September and just said like, hey, would you consider writing an op-ed with this theme around the end of the year? This, predictions for LDS women in 2025. And so I had that opportunity in the back of my mind. And I actually had a conversation with two friends, Nina and Emma, in like November-ish. And they were asking me like, hey, when are you going to do something like this? And I remember them just saying like, you know what, when the right thing comes up, you'll know. And I just kind of realized that I could do that with this op-ed and that would be a very public and a great avenue to kind of reach probably further than if I just posted something on my Instagram account alone. So I was trying to write something and I said to Kyle, like, I'm having such a hard time putting on like a happy face, like positive predictions. And he was like, well, then just be honest. And so I wrote the piece essentially saying like, I don't have a lot of hope. And then at the end was able to kind of say like, and even though I no longer identify as an LDS woman, even though like I will always be an LDS woman, you know what I mean? Like it just was a really good opportunity. And I think luckily it had the effect that I was hoping for. I'm really happy that the experience has been like overwhelmingly positive, which I feel so lucky because I know so many people step away from the church, and when they feel ready to announce it, they have to face really difficult things. And I feel like in my personal life, because anyone who engages with me, they knew where I was at.
Yeah.
And so it mostly was just like the general public finding out. And so I feel really happy that I kind of did that in my own way and on my own timetable. And it has been a really positive experience.
Oh, I'm so glad. I want to talk more about being officially out. But first, I just want to say that op-ed, it's so beautiful because it just so well sums up, I think, how so many of us feel, particularly as women in the church, which is like, we tried. And yeah, maybe the church is giving little tiny breadcrumbs, but for you, that wasn't enough. But you still care because that was such a big part of your life.
Yeah.
And I think that's just such a beautiful way, particularly in like a long form writing piece, to be able to share all of that was just so powerful. It was really cool to see how resonant that was. And I think that, again, I just think that it held a lot of nuance, I guess, is what was so powerful about that, because it is a really nuanced thing. And it's not always just like, woohoo, like peace out.
No.
There's a lot to it. And I think you were able to just really powerfully describe that experience for so many women. So thank you for putting that into words. Let's talk about now.
Yeah.
You've, come out publicly in this way. You've received that good response, which I'm so happy about. After having made that public statement, what is kind of like, what are you looking forward to in your online career, in your career generally? What's next for Rosie?
I mean, a couple of thoughts come to mind. One, just like a huge weight feels lifted. Even those like I had kind of like transitioned, I don't know, we need a better word, in my real normal private life, I didn't realize how much of a weight and burden would feel like it had been lifted. I think the greatest thing about like accepting that I no longer am or want to be a part of the church, I feel like the world has opened up to me. And I realized that in the church, I knew what the life of a 40, 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old Mormon woman looked like. Of course, there would be differences and my life would be unique, but essentially I knew the callings I would serve in, the responsibilities I would have. There's kind of a specific path. And closing the door on that, I realized like I can do anything I want. I can be friends with anyone I want. I can serve in my community any way I want. Like there's just this open and free feeling that I am just so obsessed with and keep talking about. I'm at this point where I'm like, I don't know. And I'm so excited to figure it out.
Yeah, and excited not to know, which is really cool. I've never thought about it in terms of that life path. But yeah, when I think about myself at 60, I'm like, maybe we'll be in France, Bentley and I, when our girls are off in college, and who knows what. Even my children's lives now are so much more, it's so much more open for them of like, not that every single Mormon goes to BYU or goes to UVU, but like a lot of them do, and a lot of them go on missions. And I've never thought, to your point, of how exciting it is to not know, because the possibilities are now so much more endless than they were before.
Yeah.
That's super, super fun to think about.
It's so fun. And that, for me, Stewie, was a huge thing. Like I knew that I, as an adult, could be a progressive Mormon in the church, and I could listen to certain teachings and certain things and be like, no, I'm not interested in that, or I don't believe in that. But once I had Stewie, I was like, I cannot raise him in this church, especially because even if I choose to do the thing where we go home at the end of church and kind of debunk certain things and pick through and say what we do and don't believe in, there is a very crucial teaching in the church that anyone who tells you differently is wrong and should not be trusted. Like the prophet literally said, do not trust non-believers.
Yep.
Don't counsel with non-believers. And I just thought, I cannot raise him in a church that essentially would be teaching him to trust the organization more than his family. And also, a very crucial thing is I always said, like, well, if I found out that Stewie was gay or queer, we would immediately leave the church. And I was talking to a loved one about that who'd already stepped away. And he said, like, but by the time you find that out, the damage has already been done. And that hit me so hard. That if hopefully Stewie would never have to like come out to me. Like, hopefully it would just be part of our life. But if he did at like 12, he's had 12 years of being told.
And like the most developmentally crucial years.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I just was like, there's no way.
Yeah. That to me is kind of one of the biggest things ever. Where I'm like, you got to think about all the possibilities for your child, and that they don't have the same ability to reason and like, critically think about some of these things, and just saving your child from all of the unpacking that we've had to do.
And no matter how many times I say to Stewie, like, Stewie, men and women are equal. All people are just people and they're equal. You can't undo that every Sunday he's sitting and only sees men.
Yep.
Like there are, and that is harmful to both girls and boys.
Yep.
I think that is the thing that people say, like, oh, I left the church as soon as I had daughters. I'm like, it's harmful to men too.
No,
like,
in some ways, I think
so
it's more
harmful.
crucial to get the little boys out of there. Seriously, my sister and my friend just had boys. I've randomly just been around like young girls, like most of my girls' friends anyway. And I was thinking about just how excited I am too for this generation to be raising boys.
Yeah.
And how, to your point, like it's just as harmful for men,
Absolutely.
just in a very different way.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of healing has to take place after leaving the church. And I'm curious where you feel like you're at in that healing journey.
Yeah.
And, depending where you're at, like what has helped you in healing?
Therapy.
Amen.
I mean, which is hard to say because I know that isn't like inaccessible to so many people. I know a lot of people go through like a very angry stage. I think I very publicly went through my angry stage while still in the church. I think you have to feel all of that. You have to feel the anger. You have to feel the loss. You have to feel the regret. You have to feel the embarrassment. So much embarrassment. But all of that is like you just have to go through it. And takes time, but like we have a lifetime and that's okay. And I just like can't overstate having someone that at least you can talk to without judgment and without kind of like pushing or preaching. Just having someone that was just okay to be like, yeah, that's okay. Like I can't tell you how many times, even within like the last 3 years, I would say to my therapist, like, I don't want any of this, but I don't want to leave the church. And she would just say, that's okay. You don't have to. You don't have to. And this is a trans woman who has zero interest in anything to do with any religion. Has every reason to be like, get out of there. Or like, how dare you still support this? And she just would say like, you don't have to. You don't have to leave the church. And just that allowing myself time to come to my choices on my own terms meant the world. And I don't want to try to portray that like I've debunked everything or processed everything. I really think it will be a lifetime thing, but I do feel really kind of like settled where I'm at. And some people have been like, are you going to start going to another church or what? And I just feel like, I have been, the only way I can describe it is like, as if I've been eating a cheeseburger my whole life. And there might be cheeseburgers without cheese or with avocado. Like right now, I don't want anything
Yeah, just don't want a burger.
I don't want anything to do with it. I just like, I'm good.
Yeah.
For now. I need to figure out like something I said to my therapist was like, I hate this feeling of like, are you an ex-Mormon Rosie? Are you a Mormon Rosie? Like, what are you? Like, I just want to be me. And that is what I'm doing right now. Like, I just get to be me. And I'm 35 years old. I've never been able to just be me. And it's so exciting. And it feels incredible. And I didn't even know that it could feel that incredible. And because I think you grow up in the church thinking you leave the church and it's going to be this dark, scary, awful, lonely thing. And in a lot of ways it can be. But I never imagined that it could feel so happy, so freeing, so peaceful, and feel like it feels more right than anything I've ever felt.
I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah.
And I feel so similarly. It also sounds like with your timeline, you were really heavily deconstructing while still being a member of the church.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's interesting for me to think about too, because the actual like leaving of the church and when that happens in the timeline can happen at various stages of deconstructing. But it sounds like by the time you really just like cut that tie, you were pretty heavily deconstructed.
Yeah, I think people are like, oh, now that you've announced this, so much in your life has changed. I'm like, oh, no. Like, it's been years. And now I'm just letting basically strangers know.
Yeah.
And so it, I think, feels a little bit backwards from the outside perspective. But yeah, like I was so desperate to stay and make it work that like my digging and my desire to try to make it work was the process of me kind of like realizing like, oh, shoot.
Yeah. You tried to make it work so hard that you realized you literally couldn't make it work.
I tried so hard.
Tell me more about, you're talking about this joy of just being able to be you. Tell me more about whether it's in your day-to-day life, if there's any rituals or routines, or what is giving you that sense of joy and meaning now.
Something that really is giving me joy is just like digging into things that feel really interesting to me. Because I spent so much of my life was thinking about Mormonism. Like there are not words to like explain to people how much I thought about it, both because it was my job. It just was everything. I feel like I clicked close all tabs in my brain. And I just feel like I have so much more space in my being. And so just like getting really into gardening or crafting or creating, it feels so incredible to me. It's just so exciting. I just have time to be me. It probably is to people outside the church, or it might sound confusing to anyone, but I really feel like I have just cleared up so much space in my mind and in my spirit, and I'm finding so much joy in doing these random little things.
Yes, that is making so much sense to me. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but I'm making a pivot toward literally exactly what you just said, because I was realizing the exact same thing about myself, even though I've been out of the church for as long as I have, but doing so much Mormon stuff for my job.
Yeah.
It was just taking up too much space and time for me. And I want to clear up space and time and mental energy toward other things. And I was realizing like, oh, as long as I'm, sitting on a mic every week, if I'm talking about Mormonism, I'm also having to stay up to date on all things Mormonism. I'm having to research Mormon topics, which I still feel like, I have a niche interest in that, and that's fine to an extent, but I just wanted that space that you just described. And the way you said it, I was like, yes, that's exactly it. I'm thinking of a comment because I posted a reel of Bentley and I, and we were thrifting on a Sunday because my sweet mother-in-law, bless her heart, but she'll often take the twins on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
So we get to go do like a fun date on Sundays.
That's so fun.
So we were thrifting, and I just did a reel and was like, out, church, in, thrifting on a Sunday morning. Yeah. And then people were commenting like the things they do on a Sunday morning now. And someone said, speaking of gardening, they commented and they were like, I got to go out and like garden for 2 hours. And I never would have had time to do this if I was going to church. And then someone commented back and was like, you could still have time to like go to church and garden, right? Like church is 2 hours now or something. And I was thinking about that comment so much because I'm like, it is so much deeper than that. It is so much deeper than like
just 2 hours a week.
Yes,
right.
And not even if it was only physically you sit in church for 2 hours, that is completely disregarding like even the logistics of waking up, getting ready, doing your hair, putting on a dress, getting your kids ready. If you have kids, like driving to the church, like
preparing the meal because you're not going out to eat.
Exactly. Like there is so much that really does just get tied up into that. And that's not even to mention callings and weekly activities and monthly activities and holiday activities. And I was just thinking like, no, there is something really particularly special about having a whole Sunday, an entire day where you can do whatever you want and filling those spaces with new traditions and new routines and new rituals. And that's kind of just like a microcosm in a very logistic way, but on like the grander scale, opening up your being to that is so beautiful. And I was also thinking about what you were saying with the path of a Mormon woman and how majority of the time there's like kind of a particular path.
Right. And
thinking about even the mental energy and space and possibility it opens up just to allow yourself any life path that opens up to you.
Yeah.
And how freeing that can be, kind of in that same sense of not even necessarily the day-to-day, but just of like how expansive I guess it is for little things and also for these like really big kind of cosmic existential things too.
Yeah. And I've just seen like a common response to something like your reel would be like, oh, well, you're doing something just for yourself. You're not serving your community, da, 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 da. And I just think like, for the path of a Mormon woman, a big part of it is like making meals for people, right? Or like throwing funeral after parties. That's definitely not the right word.
I mean, I don't know a better word, honestly.
But you know what I mean? But I just feel like, okay, if that is my path, I also know that a large part of that path is resentment. Either like on a casual level of like, I don't want to do this, or guess what? I get to choose my community now, and I get to serve in a way in my community that honestly feels nothing but positive to me. And I don't have a man that's going to come and take that away from me at some point or tell me that I need to do it in a different way that I don't want to do. Like, and that's not selfish. That's just healthy. Like my service, a way that I serve in my community is at the sharing place. There's nothing negative in that for me. And I love it. And it is nothing, I'm repeating myself, nothing but positive. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like we are constantly being told, well, you're being selfish. No, that's not. And what is wrong with taking care of yourself and choosing to have a positive, healthy life? Like I do not think that there's going to be a medal in the next life of like, you did the most shit that you didn't want to do.
Yep.
Or like it's so much rooted in the pioneer kind of like walked across barefoot
it's
in
martyrdom.
the blood and bloody snow. Like
Yeah.
I don't think there's a medal for that.
Yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the last thing I want to ask you about is community, because I feel like you are such a community builder, and this probably ties in for you with political activism as well. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I'm thinking about your capacity to build community and how also exciting that is. I'm also saying exciting a lot, but it's all very exciting that now you get to do that in a way that feels more aligned to you and that isn't wrapped up in resentment and mental gymnastics. So what is that side of things like? You mentioned the sharing place. I'm not even sure what that is. I know you do a lot of political activism. You're very involved in community politics, things like that. I think for a lot of people, that is a void that Mormonism leaves, because at the very least, they make it not easy, but they kind of lay out for you the ways to serve and kind of facilitate that. So how have you found being able to serve, being able to contribute to the community outside of the Mormon framework?
I think because I was single for so long, Mormonism really has not been my community per se since I was a child. I think I've had a very different experience compared to someone who's married with children in the church, because that definitely is your community. But because I was single, a lot of my friends I met through my ward, but once you get to be in your late 20s, 30s as a single person, your friends are no longer in your ward. They've moved. Everyone's doing different things because of jobs. A lot of them have left the church. Like, it just changes. And so I think because of that, I have built my community outside of the church for a long time. And I don't know, there's just like, again, this freeing up of space of, I think when your whole community is Mormonism, because you are doing so much in the church, there's such a huge time requirement. It's so natural that your community is so insular. And I don't think that's at all to blame. We only have so much capacity. And being outside of the church, it's so fun because like I feel this greater desire and drive to connect with my neighbors, regardless of their involvement in the church. And the sharing place is a really great place that offers, which I will always want to shout out, grief support for children.
Oh, cool.
And so they're all over Utah. And so I have these deep friendships with my fellow volunteers. And I don't really see them outside of the sharing place, but I see them twice a month there, and they're a huge part of my community. And because of political activism, I've been able to connect with like so many, especially incredible women. And it just is so fun that the church is not a part of any of that. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize, I saw it from being a member of the church, looking at non-members, and you feel this pressure to connect with non-members from the missionary standpoint. I didn't realize what a barrier the church was. And to be on the other side, to be like, oh, we can just connect because we're people, and I don't need to have the church interfering, is so fun.
Yeah. Again, I'm just thinking of expansiveness of, yes, there is something beautiful about a church community.
Hugely. And it like when I was traveling as a teenager, that was so important for me.
It can be so helpful and so beautiful, but it can also be, I think objectively is very insular because that community is based on being similar in some pretty key ways. And so to be able to expand beyond that, not only are you diversifying the connections that you're making, but you're also now participating in like just a broader community, a community that's not based on do we think the same way about these specific things. And I think that that's a really expansive move outward. And I'm really inspired by that because I think I've been so jaded against like service that literally like if it's like a volunteer thing still in my brain, I'm like, I'm in Young Women's and they're making me do this and I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm ready to start like participating and serving more and volunteering more. So that's super helpful to hear. Thank you so much, Rosie. I think that I was telling Rosie this before we started recording, but Bentley, my husband, this morning was like, who are you interviewing today? And I said, Rosie Card. And he was like, you've talked about her a lot over the past few years. And I was like, that really sums it up because, I mean, I was following your stuff all through my progressive Mormon phase. Like, you were probably a huge, not probably, you were a huge stepping stone for me. And like you said, like having those conversations be online in that way, reading what you had written, reading comments of women, of people like processing all of this is just so huge. And I just want to make one more nod to what you said about what great work you did in that space and how people were able to bridge gaps because they could say, look, she's still in the church, but she's saying these things. And so I think that that path, the way that it all played out, at least for the people, you know, the general public getting to like watch and learn from you, that was and continues to be very, very impactful for this community. So thank you for all the work that you do. And thanks for coming to Girls Camp.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you everyone for listening. Bye.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
This has been a 58 Ember production. For more shows, please visit the 58 Ember channel, 58ember.com, or find us at 58 Ember Media on socials.